to.
I mean, is that? Tell me.
Go ahead.
All right. Another Saturday with all of you as I read another chapter from Guided. I am Linda Deir. 2 Saturdays ago, I read to you from chapter 15 of my true life story, Guided. Her spirit guide angels were her best friends and life coaches. I read about the shock that changed everything. All the way up to the Tahoe house, I was crunching numbers in my mind. Like a switch had gone off, I had now become obsessed with what I was going to do once the Tahoe house was done. I had to stop along the way to keep some business appointments, which put me behind around 30 minutes from Mark and Cindy. Once I was back on the road, everything was fine for a while. Then, about 10 minutes before my turnoff, I was overcome with a terrible feeling. In an instant, I knew Mark and Cindy had been in a car accident. It was crystal clear. I shifted out of planning mode and into survival as both of my arms went limp. And it took everything I had physically, emotionally, and mentally to keep driving. Today, I will be reading to you from chapter 16 of Guided. A visitor from beyond returns with a message. Just a few days after Mark died, he materialized at my place. I was in so much pain and had been incessantly asking why this had to happen. Mark sat right in front of me in complete physical form and told me, "Please let me go." He said he was in a great deal of pain and I was holding him back. I never questioned how he could materialize. I just asked him why this accident had to happen. I was in shock and mad at the same time. He was so physically present that I could even smell him as he sat there right in front of me. He didn't answer me and just left. He materialized a second time at the exact same location 2 days later. This time, Cindy was there with me and witnessed that second visitation. So sit back and relax as I tell the story about how, despite the dysfunction, my spirit guides took me on one journey after another that led me to a greater understanding of myself. Guided, available on Amazon in paperback, Kindle, and audiobook format, and I read the book. Okay. And there we are. See that? We're about a little bit more than halfway there. There's 28 chapters in Guided, by the way. We are on chapter 16 today. Chapter 16, a visitor from beyond returns with a message. Just a few days after Mark died, he materialized at my place. I was in so much pain and had been incessantly asking why this had to happen. Mark sat right in front of me in complete physical form and told me, "Please let me go." He said he was in a great deal of pain, and I was holding him back. I never questioned how he could materialize. I just asked him why this accident had to happen. I was in shock and mad at the same time. He was so physically present that I could even smell him as he sat there right in front of me. He didn't answer and just left. He materialized the second time at the exact location 2 days later. This time, Cindy was there with me and witnessed that second visitation. Although, like all the others, when I asked her about it the next day, she didn't remember it. Once again, he asked me to let him go. He repeated that it was very painful and I was holding him back. I didn't understand what he meant, But I knew this was very serious for him to return and tell me this the second time. Without hesitating, I replied by telling him, I told you not to speed and had warned you this would happen. Again, my response caused him to leave. A week after Mark died, he materialized for the third and final time. Again, he told me he needed me to let him go. Then he said, you will meet someone your age in 2 weeks, and left. For some reason, with that message, I suddenly realized what he meant about holding him back. The emotional pain I was feeling prevented him from moving on. It was it was like I was in shock. So on that third visitation, the shock was wearing off, so I could comprehend his repeated requests. Awareness. This is what can happen when someone dies and exits in such a shocking way. For their sake and yours, let go and don't perpetuate anyone's pain. Like in my case, sometimes the shock is so strong that we unknowingly prevent them from moving on. It keeps you both frozen in time. The connection I had over the years with Mary and then Mark turned my life around. I never saw any of this coming, which is probably why it was so powerful in shifting me. It was a major turning point in my life as I turned 30 years old. Mark knew this and stayed. It was his final mission here before he had to leave. The fact that his mother saw his demise coming along with everything that Mark was determined to finish before parting from this world, made me realize we all have a deadline. It's interesting to note that people who are about to die, even if they are not conscious of it, often return borrowed items to their owners. Apparently, that's what Mark was doing the night before he died when he was late to the Thanksgiving dinner I had prepared. Awareness. When it's your time, it's not something we dwell on before we leave. We just do what's right so there are no loose ends and hopefully no regrets so we can have a clean exit. I resumed my trips to Lake Tahoe to complete the house. On one of the trips, I took Cindy so she could retrace the steps she could remember before she fell to sleep the day of the accident. I knew this would be important for her and for me. We identified a spot where we identified a spot where they would have been about 10 or 15 minutes before the accident. She said that was where she had fallen asleep. No doubt, divine intervention played a part in her dozing off at that exact time. Then I took her to see the truck in the junkyard. She was shocked that she had made it out of that mangled piece of iron. Doing this was all part of the healing process for both of us. As soon as the Tahoe house was ready, I put it up for sale because I didn't want to go there anymore. It sold right away. Things work smoothly when you are aligned with what is meant to be. 2 weeks after Mark's third and final visit, I met a man named Steve at the deli just below the hill from where I built my Tahoe house. He was a handsome young guy, my own age, and was on vacation from New Jersey. He had lived in Lake Tahoe in the 70s and had come back because he loved it there and was doing some reminiscing. We were attracted to each other, and he wanted to go out on a date. I told him I was only up to Tahoe for a quick trip and had to get back to my daughter. So we agreed to meet again in a few days after I returned. When I got back to Lake Tahoe, we went to the waterfalls he loved so much. It was really a beautiful place. We spent a lot of time together and had a lot of fun. But after a few days, he had to get back to New Jersey. Being across the continent from each other, we stayed in touch by phone and mail. I started looking forward to getting mail for a change. As our relationship developed, for the second time in my life, I was selling everything I owned. Weekend after weekend, I held sales out of my storage unit where I had moved everything. My bankers, accountants, and attorneys thought I was losing it again. I knew that for a change, I was actually getting it this time. I couldn't get rid of it all fast enough. I wasn't sure what I would do next, but I knew I needed to unload. Between selling off my stuff and the proceeds from the Tahoe house, I would have enough money to start over however I wanted to. Awareness. See the workaholic here? Even with everything I had gone through, I was using my work as an antidote for my pain. Once again, I had to have something to do to distract me from the full impact of all of it. The layers were coming off, but a lot was still there. This is how it works and why it can take years to heal the stubborn issues. After I had everything sold and behind me, I bought a townhouse lot and built a custom duplex townhouse. I planned to sell one side and Cindy and I would live on the other. Cindy was 13 years old and had watched me design and build homes her entire life. This time, I asked her if she would like to participate in the design. She said she would and actually did a very good job. I built the home just as she designed it, and she loved how it turned out. I was still processing the accident that had happened months earlier. I was also very sad as I struggled to acclimate to the new me. Building the townhouse helped me get through it. It was a surprisingly easy and fun time with Cindy. One day, Cindy started telling me about how low her energy was. She said she thought something was wrong with her. She said that when she started working, she would need really good health insurance. I thought that sounded ridiculous, especially at her age. She continued with harangues about how I had so much energy, which gave me the advantage over others. She said I made everything look so easy when it wasn't easy for other people. It was like hearing Alex and everyone else all over again. It would turn out to be a resentment she would hold against me for the rest of my life. Unfortunately, the resentment was stronger than the love required for our second chance at having a relationship. Her resentment evolved into full-blown jealousy as the years went by. She also reasoned that my high energy was why my life worked out so well, making what I did look easy. She didn't understand how this really worked. I had the help of my guides that developed into a strong relationship over my lifetime. They guided me, making everything I did look effortless. Awareness. This is what it's like when you consciously co-create your life with the help of your guides. They don't do the work for you, but they do point you in the right direction at just the right time. But you need to listen. The next step is to take the action, which is where many people fail. Throughout the construction of my townhouse, Steve and I continued with our long-distance romance. We met in Las Vegas in November of 1982 and won at everything we played. With luck like that, we decided our relationship was meant to be. Our long distance romance became stronger than ever. I went to visit Steve in New Jersey a couple of months later. I met his family. I learned about his work and more about him. While I was there, I got a phone message that there was a structural problem with the Tahoe house I had sold. This was serious, and before I left New Jersey to return home, I called the most reputable structural engineers in Tahoe to go out to the property and evaluate the situation. After the house had survived the record snowstorms of 1981 through 1982 without any damage at all, I couldn't imagine what could have gone wrong. By the time I returned home, the report was ready. I asked for a copy to be faxed to me and to the owners in San Francisco. The report showed that there was no structural deficiencies, and the damage the new owners were complaining about had occurred because of excessive ice dams that built up on the roof, crashing down on the front covered walkway. These excessive ice dams were caused by a sprinkler the owner had placed on the roof in their attempt to melt the snow instead of shoveling it off. The report stated that the weight of these ice dams would have collapsed the roof had it not been built to exceed building codes. The two people who bought this house from me were a home builder in San Francisco and his attorney partner. Even after the inspection report, they still sued me. The last thing I needed was to be drawn back into this Tahoe nightmare. But that's what happened. The lawsuit went on for 5 years and finally ended in Superior Court when they ruled in my favor. It took the higher courts to expose the lies these new owners committed. For me, it jeopardized my contractor's license, and I was forced to bond around the pending lawsuit so I could continue to make a living. This was a case of David and Goliath. They were the very wealthy and powerful Goliath attempting to destroy little David because of their own poor judgment. I had a great attorney, and for the first time, I trusted in someone else to go to battle for me. I had always fought my own fights, so this was a new and different way of handling things. After I had returned home from my visit to New Jersey, Steve called me and told me he had quit his job. He said he didn't like living in New Jersey and was never crazy about his job. He wanted to fly out to California to be with me. That was all fine with me. I had just bought a Ford Bronco. I sold the townhouses, bought a travel trailer, and he, Cindy, and I went to New Jersey to get his things. It was an adventure. I had never traveled like that before, except when my dad had taken us on summer vacation up to Canada in the early 1960s. Despite the fun on the trip, Cindy started being difficult. She did not like Steve interfering with our renewed relationship and wanted me to herself. By the time we got to Colorado, Cindy was out of control. So we put her on a plane home to stay with friends and return to school. We had never planned on her being on the entire trip due to school, so it was more of a planned modification than a real disruption. During the 3 weeks of our adventure, Steve and I had fun planning how we would live and what we would do when we got back to California. When we got home, I sold the travel trailer for $50 more than I had paid for it, and we moved into a rental house with a pool. Life was good. Cindy liked living in the new place, but she resented Steve. That was a turning point for Cindy. She was resentful of me too. There was no way to have a relationship with her that wouldn't require serious changes and sacrifices on my part. Succumbing to the tyranny of her desires was never going to work for me. My guides would not sanction it. They showed me that this kind of compromise always led to a life of regrets and resentments. Awareness. People who demand that you lower your standards and live a life of compromise are just looking for company in their compromised lives. The truth is that you can never help someone by joining them in their misery. Soon after we got back to California and settled into our house, I started looking for a project. I received an offer to build one almost immediately, but Steve felt like I was running over him. He wasn't sure where he fit in. I saw his point and passed on the project. Then I sought and found something he felt more comfortable with. It was a good project in a great area. It involved building moderately priced homes, which was easy for me. It was a new adventure for Steve. Building houses was something he had always wanted to do with the family money, but his mother didn't want to take the risk. We started it in the summer of 1983. Okay, so next week, you guys. Next week, August 22nd, at 1 p.m. Pacific time, I will read to you from chapter 17 of Guided. Dad dies mysteriously. One evening, about 5 months after Steve and I had settled in Sacramento, we were eating dinner when the phone rang. We were just letting it ring when all of a sudden I got a strong message from my guides that I needed to answer it. It was my older brother, Randy, who never called me. He told me that Dad was in the hospital. Although Randy never said Dad was dying, I told him to tell Mom not to let him die before I got there. I dropped everything and Steve and I went to the hospital, which took about 25 minutes. On my way to the hospital, I was wondering why I knew he was going to die. So, until then, you have help. You are never alone and always being guided.